Is this it? Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Happy Halloween. So before we get started, I want to say thank all of you for coming down to the Caymans. Thank you, our sponsors, and all the speakers. Thank you for being here today. It really, it's such a unique conference. It's my first time in the Caymans, and I kind of want to move here now. So before we get started, a little disclaimer. I work for a company called Splunk. Who's heard of Splunk? I don't know why I did. I can't see anything. So I work for Splunk. Splunk was bought by a company called Cisco. I'm also faculty at IAN's research, and I do a bunch of other stuff. What I'm talking to you about today has nothing to do with any of my day job stuff. I just want to be super clear, like, oh, well, Mick from Splunk said blah, blah, blah. No, this is just me talking to you about some stuff I learned throughout my career. So don't hold me accountable, please. Second disclaimer, I used AI to generate all my slides. And any of you that fear AI taking your job, you are fine, all right? This spelling is just atrocious. I just want to point it out now that, like, there's going to be some misspellings. Know that I can spell. If I see a little squiggly line, I know that it's wrong, but AI does not. So my 10x prompt engineer career is slightly different. So first, going to go through who am I? Going to talk about the 80s car industry for a bit. Going to talk about the Seiki model and how Seiki works in cybersecurity and how we can apply that. So first off, my name is Mick Baccio. I'm a global security advisor at a company called Splunk. I've been doing cyber for a very long time. I started off in the military like a lot of people, did crypto stuff because I found that I was colorblind the day I joined the military, and they were like, you can't be a nuclear engineer. And it was red wire, green wire, whatever. So my focus has really been network defense, blue team side of the house, and then I really got into threat intelligence. Worked incident response jobs, Pentagon, Health and Human Services, CDC, ended up at the White House during the transition from the Obama administration to the Trump administration. Let me tell you, it was wild. And then after the government, I was the CISO for Pete Buttigieg, his 2020 campaign when he ran for president. So that was just a really unique experience for me. I have a conference called FrontCon. It's just an annual thing a group of us run to talk about threat hunting and just knowledge transfer, knowledge creation. Like I mentioned, IAN's faculty. I'm a DEF CON goon. Next year will be 10 years, so if you see me, I'm that guy yelling, please step on that side. I teach lockpicking. It's super fun. If you've never done it, I highly recommend it. And I love Air Jordans. Like, my kids are not going to college because I love Air Jordans so much. So on the socials, that's my LinkedIn, that's my, if you search No Hack Me anywhere, you're going to find me. I mean, that's my handle. It's been my handle for like 20 some odd years. Just search that anywhere and you'll find me. All right. I actually can't see my speaker notes. Uh-oh. Right? I'm sorry about this. You gotta take it easy. Oh, no. All right, well, I'll vamp for a little bit until it comes up. The idea behind this talk is laying a little groundwork. There are two kinds of knowledge. Perfect. You have tacit knowledge, right? And tacit knowledge is personal experience. It's experience-based knowledge. It's difficult to articulate, it's difficult to formalize. It's rooted in individual insights, like riding a bike, reading body language, recognizing patterns in data based on a personal experience. So tacit knowledge is highly subjective and context-specific. It's often transferred through personal interaction, like conferences just like this, rather than written instruction. On the other side of that, you have explicit knowledge. So explicit knowledge is a more formalized and structured, can be easily articulated, can be written down, can be shared with others. This is like manuals, documents, databases, procedures, something that's distributed to an organization. So since it's codified, explicit knowledge is easily transferable across organizations. Oh my goodness, I'm so hot. And you can do that without direct personal interaction. So those two kinds of knowledge, all right? So tacit and explicit knowledge are both super crucial in an organization to be successful, because you have to take the tacit knowledge and combine it with the explicit knowledge, and you're creating new knowledge. Meanwhile, like cybersecurity, we rely a lot on tacit knowledge. It's just something I know how to do because I've done this for so long. And on the other side of the explicit knowledge, incident response playbooks, something like that, threat intelligence reports. These are examples of explicit knowledge. So I wanted to talk about how we can be derivative and still make that matter and still be important. Little background. Who here, and I can't see, just clap maybe. Any Gen X? Like, who remembers the 80s? Yes. Well, I'll be in bed by 9, it's fine. So during the 80s, Japanese car manufacturing was dominating. All right, and US companies relied heavily on strict processes and explicit documentation, where Japanese firms like Toyota had explicit knowledge, or shared tacit knowledge, skills, and insight. They shared those across the organization. So it was a continuous exchange of knowledge through concepts like Kaizen, and we'll get into that a bit later. And after a while, people started to figure out, like, wow, why were they dominating? So there was some research done. The idea behind this talk was, there was this movie called Gung Ho. Came out in 1986. It's Michael Keaton. It's an old Ron Howard movie. Basically, there's this guy named Hunt Stevenson, who Michael Keaton plays, works in a small auto factory in Hadleyville, Pennsylvania. All right, factory shut down. He goes to Japan and tries to convince this company, Asan Motors, to reopen the factory and they could build cars. And turns out, culture clashes, organizational structures, but we put aside our differences and we all come together and it works out in the end because it's an 80s movie and that's what happens. So throughout that, you see the adoption of a lot of principles, and that's what I kind of want to talk about here and how that works. All right, so think of this, late 70s, early 80s. Japanese automakers rapidly outpaced companies like GM and Ford, and Toyota, Nissan, and Honda were the top of the game. So they gained a strong foothold, and in 1981, Japanese cars made up over 20% of the US market, which is crazy. And GM's market share dropped to around 40%, 30%. So in comparison, American manufacturers struggled with inefficiencies in their production processes, and the quality of their vehicles was often criticized. This led to declining sales, GM and Ford experiencing significant financial losses, and the introduction of voluntary export restraints by Japan in the 80s was an attempt to address the imbalance. Like, it was Japan who said, hey, look, I'm sorry, we are just dominating. We're going to not export as many cars. And that didn't really work out. So these developments exemplify the impact that outdated processes in the American automotive industry and set the stage for why innovation and models like Seiki become crucial for future competitiveness. Did that not work? Oh, I'm sorry about that. My notes aren't moving. Okay. I think that's it. So the contrast between American and Japanese automotive companies in the 80s can be largely attributed to differences in their approaches to knowledge management and organizational culture. You remember the US in the 80s, think IBM, where it was very rigid, very top-down processes. It was very hierarchical. It was chain of command. You followed it. You didn't ask any questions. You just did your job and didn't do much outside of that. Think in the 80s, Ford still had the assembly line, right? Mass production model inherited from its early 20th century roots, and it prioritized efficiency rather than continuous process improvement. And GM, pretty bureaucratic. It was similar where workers were expected to follow, hey, here's the rules, here's the conditions, here's the procedures, don't go too much outside of that, which contributed to a decline in quality and competitiveness. Decision-making was slow, and communication between departments was limited. I know this sounds like super familiar to all of you. Other things that happened were something called lean manufacturing, where Japanese automakers had a lean manufacturing approach exemplified, if you remember the Toyota production system. It focused on eliminating waste and optimizing efficiency. It required sharing constantly of tacit and explicit knowledge to refine that process. So it's this concept of knowledge-sharing culture, where Japanese firms focused on the creation of new knowledge through collaboration and continuous learning, which was absent at the time in many American firms. And there's this concept, I just love the spelling, I think one of the prompts I had was like no text, and no text was on there. So there's this concept called Kaizen. And I couldn't find like the English equivalent of it. It's this concept of continuous improvement, and that is what heavily influenced the Seiki model. So like I mentioned, at the time, American firms was very top-down. You know, the president, vice president, and so on and so forth. And you, as just a line worker, you had no say in anything. You just kind of did your job. So the philosophy of Kaizen, it emphasized incremental innovation. So you're not trying to land on the moon once, you're just trying to get a little bit closer each time. We're creating new knowledge each time. And those processes constantly evolve to meet changing demands. So the idea of continuous improvement and knowledge sharing, Japanese automakers like Toyota and Nissan followed that Kaizen model. Toyota had a system called just-in-time. Just-in-time minimized inventory by producing only what was needed. And that required strong communication and strong knowledge sharing between workers and management. Like, hey, we need this many chips to build this many cars. We know that it's a 6-month backlog to get these chips. So we have just enough that we need. We can continue production and keep moving things along. And Nissan had a similar model where it was a flexible production that allowed for rapid changes in output based on demand. So workers were cross-trained, could rotate between different tasks, and it fostered a more collaborative environment and better overall efficiency. And those differences had significant impacts. That top-down, rigid American system was slower. Japanese counterparts did a lot better. And they encouraged socialization and externalization from their workers. Japanese automakers constantly refined systems, whereas American firms stagnated in hierarchical, less flexible models. So that's what happened. And then people tried to figure out in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s, like, well, how? Like, how did they do that? They just weren't just better. There's a reason. There's a method to it. So these two, well, 3 cats, but the 2 cats, Takeuchi and Nonaka, 2 researchers in Japan, who came up with this idea to explain how Japanese companies, particularly industries like manufacturing and automotive, were so successful in innovation and knowledge creation compared to the US. So it was inspired by competitive pressures from the global market, especially their ability to quickly innovate and improve products. So the Seiki model emerged as a framework to try and explain how companies like Toyota and Honda were able to consistently outperform American automotive giants like GM and Ford in the 80s and 90s. All right, so Seiki. Seiki is an acronym that represents knowledge conversion within organizations. Socialization, externalization, combination, and internalization. And I'll go through each of these. These models describe how personal, experience-based, and explicit documented formal knowledge interact and are transformed into new knowledge. So there was a book came out in '95 called The Knowledge Creating Company, and this is where the model was first published. And it became foundational in the field of knowledge management and organizational learning. I think it's still used as a reference today. So socialization. This is sharing tacit knowledge. Direct experience and interpersonal interactions, like I'm doing to you now. The phase focuses on learning from others by observation, imitation, and participation in shared activities. Kind of like these conferences is a perfect example of it. Socialization is generally in informal settings, mentoring, face-to-face interactions, or working together on projects, things like that. The goal here is to transfer knowledge that is difficult to articulate, like personal skills. And you do that generally in shared activities. So an example would be a senior cybersecurity expert mentoring a new employee, showing them how to detect subtle patterns in network traffic that might indicate an attack's coming or might indicate an attack has occurred. Now, the expert may not be fully able to articulate and explain their intuition in words, but through those shared experience, the new employee is going to observe and work alongside them and pick up on that knowledge. Does that make sense? So, externalization. This is converting tacit knowledge to explicit knowledge. So externalization is articulating the tacit knowledge that we have and converting it into a form that can be shared more easily. Think of like documents, diagrams, manuals. It's about codifying personal insights into structured formats. Now, it works because individuals express their tacit knowledge in ways that others can understand. This often happens in brainstorming sessions, discussions, or during the writing of reports where we're all collaborating in one document and there's those actionable insights that turn into an overall framework. So an example of this would be a cybersecurity team documents the insights gained from a recent incident, turning them into a detailed incident response playbook. We've all done this probably at least once, right? Here's an incident that happened, here's how we responded to it, so if it happens again, we know what to do. Now, this playbook we just created can be shared across the organization. So again, allowing others to follow those structured steps when facing similar threats. So next stage is combination. Combination refers to the process of bringing together different pieces of explicit knowledge into a system that creates new understanding. It involves organizing, integrating, and systematizing knowledge from various sources. This would be something like creating a database or a report or a model to compile information from different areas, right? This is like you have 6 different threat feeds coming in and are all for one goal. So it's about synthesizing explicit knowledge to make it more comprehensive and applicable to solving complex problems. An example of this is cybersecurity organization will create a threat model by integrating data from multiple sources, right? You've all got threat intelligence feeds, you've got log files, and you've got previous reports. So we're going to combine those things and form a holistic view of potential risks. And the combined data is then used to improve defensive posture and our overall defensive strategies. And the last phase is internalization. So this is absorbing explicit knowledge as tacit knowledge. So it occurs when individuals learn from the explicit knowledge and apply it in their own experiences. Hopefully, and they convert it back into tacit knowledge. This is how structured information is absorbed and becomes part of personal knowledge. So you read reports, you read case studies, you go through training, and then you apply that knowledge in real-life situations. Over time, that explicit knowledge that you learn becomes second nature in forming your decisions and actions. An example of this would be you've got an analyst out there who studies the company's incident response playbook, top to bottom, and it applies it during a real cyber attack. Through repeated application, the analyst internalizes the knowledge, improving their ability to respond to future incidents, and without referring to that playbook again. So it's just creating knowledge over and over. The easiest way, kind of visualize this, is the 4 corners here. Think of it like golden spiral. All right, so we have knowledge, we're creating new knowledge each time, but that knowledge that we've just created is a little more complex each time, and that spiral gets bigger, so every time we create something, it's gonna be a little more complex, and that's the idea, is to constantly create new knowledge. So, that's a Seiki model in a nutshell. Thanks for coming. No. So far, we've seen how the 80s auto industry was like kind of trashy in America. The struggles they had laid the foundation for understanding knowledge creation and how the Seiki model emerged as a way to explain how Japanese companies consistently outperformed their Western counterparts. So what does that mean today, right? Like that's a great story, Mick, but like how do I apply that in cybersecurity? Just as car companies needed to innovate quickly to stay ahead, so do security teams. I think every time we turn around, there's a new breach, there's a new data loss, there's a new APT something is getting compromised, and that's something we deal with every day in our jobs. So what we're trying to do is constantly evolve, adapt, learn. So let's have some ideas of why being derivative is important and how we can apply that knowledge creation model in cybersecurity. This is my favorite. I asked to draw Ongo Gobloigan as a Pixar character, and that's what I got. So, all right, let's talk about derivative works. Who is familiar with the cyber kill chain? Anybody heard of it? Yeah, like we've all heard of it. Would you be shocked if I told you that was not an original thing? Like I love Eric, I love Klopp, the whole gang, but like it was actually based on the kill chain, like the kinetic kill chain the DoD uses when they want to, yeah. So cyber kill chain was developed in 2011. Someone check my math on that. And it builds up on the concept of knowledge creation by outlining steps, a cyber attack, and how defenders can disrupt it. Came from military kill chain frameworks, and it got formalized by the gang over at Lockheed. So it's a derivative of a traditional military framework adapted for cybersecurity. It enhances knowledge creation by allowing security teams to formalize responses and collaborate in threat analysis, integrating both tacit and explicit knowledge, real-world incidents, and explicit data from threat feeds. So since its introduction, like I saw a lot of hands go up. We all use a kill chain. But derivative of the kill chain, you have other frameworks like the diamond model. You have MITRE ATT&CK. And all these things are derivative of other sources. So speaking of MITRE ATT&CK, everybody's heard of that, yeah? I know Adam's like, yeah, I heard it. So MITRE ATT&CK is a framework that is derivative and extends the principles of SAICI into cybersecurity. Just like SAICI emphasizes converting tacit knowledge into explicit knowledge and vice versa, MITRE ATT&CK gathers explicit knowledge about adversarial tactics and techniques and documents it into a structured framework. Now, security teams use it to combine various data points and externalize their insights, building on real-world experiences, building on their tacit knowledge. Then, through ongoing collaboration and internalization, MITRE ATT&CK continuously evolves, making it a living knowledge tool for cybersecurity. And I think there's probably a Halloween surprise later today when it comes to MITRE ATT&CK frameworks. ISACs, Information Sharing Analysis Centers. These play a critical role in cybersecurity, right? Everybody knows what ISAC is. Some of us are probably members of ones. It creates this collaboration. It fosters this sense of collaboration across industries to share threat intelligence and enhance collective security, right? ISACs, we don't work in the same company, but we work in the same industry, work in the same group, whatever that might be, and we're collaborating together trying to increase knowledge. Each ISAC focuses on a specific sector, finance, healthcare, whatever that is. And within that sector, we can share real-time insights on emerging threats, vulnerabilities, and best practices. What targets industry A may not target industry B. So, and that explicit knowledge, those threat reports, those intelligence feeds, that ISACs embody the SAICI model. So collaboration enhances the security posture of all participating organizations by turning shared knowledge into actionable defensive strategies. So everybody's been in a SOC before, right? That's where I grew up, was working in a security operations center. Threat hunting, one of my favorite things ever. It is a super collaborative process that relies on both tacit and explicit knowledge. Professionals share strategies, that socialization part of it, and combine intelligence feeds, logs, threat reports to create comprehensive defensive strategies. And that's what you do in a SOC. It's a collaborative approach. Powered by the SAICI model, you can see how it ensures both real-time experience and documented knowledge contribute to building a dynamic, effective cybersecurity defense. DevSecOps, right? Same concept. SAICI model, it's continuous collaboration. When you think CI/CD, it's the idea of continuous integration, continuous development. Developers and security professionals. Like, I know DevSecOps is a dirty word to a lot of folks. When you think about what it is, you're sharing practical knowledge and formalizing it into secure development practices. So DevSecOps teams continuously improve security integration and development cycle. That's kind of the job. That's why we keep doing it. So it's a constant feedback loop of documenting experiences and learning from them, so that ensures both security professionals are efficient and their development pipelines. So what happens next, right? What can you do? Like, this is all great, but like, what can you go home and I want to, what's the call to action? Because I think when you talk, you hear about the call to action. So just like I mentioned earlier, the concept of Kaizen, fostering a culture of open collaboration, enables organizations to innovate quickly. By encouraging employees at all levels to share their insights, organizations can create a continuous flow of knowledge and ideas. Now, this collective approach allows problems to be solved faster and more effectively, and innovation to flourish. When you have factory workers on the ground that are communicating freely with management, that is an improvements made in real time. You can see how Toyota back in the 80s was dominating because of that mindset. The principle applies not only to manufacturing, but cybersecurity and other industries where collaboration between teams is critical, and it always will be. So, continuous learning. It's super important, right? Like if you stop learning new things, you would start being bad at your job, and you probably wouldn't have one for much longer. I think the idea of continuous learning is essential for staying adaptable and driving innovation, where shared learning ensures that employees can quickly respond to new challenges and adopt better practices. By consistently sharing your experiences and insights and lessons learned, organizations can improve their processes and innovate over time. For example, in cybersecurity, continuous learning through post-incident, I always use the word hot wash, but I don't think that's it. But post-incident review, like your post-mortem, when something happens, okay, what went wrong, what went right, what can we do better next time? And it refines your defensive strategy. We've all done them before, and this is something we're going to continue to do to try and get better. When learning is embedded into everyday activities, both industries can evolve faster and stay competitive. A structured flow of knowledge within an organization that ensures information is shared quickly and efficiently across teams is super critical. When knowledge moves freely between departments, when there aren't those stovepipes we all complain about because we're not working with team A or team B, we solve problems faster, we optimize processes more effectively. Streamline communication and collaboration, companies can reduce redundancies and increase productivity. An example in cybersecurity, so when intelligence from one team flows easily to another, response times get shortened. Defensive strategies can be rapidly adjusted. Similarly, in manufacturing, knowledge sharing leads to more efficient production lines and quicker identification of issues, potential issues. The key to success is maintaining a continuous flow of tacit and explicit knowledge across the organization, ensuring that everyone is informed and aligned. So, I like this one. The evolution of knowledge practices, it highlights a significant shift in rigid top-down management styles of the past. So in the 80s, industries like automotive and even a lot of tech industries operated with strict hierarchies, and knowledge was siloed and offered in only formal, structured ways. Like there was no BSides back then, right? So this limited the flow of innovation and made organizations slower to adapt and change. Now, with the development of models like Seiki, creation became dynamic, emphasizing the importance of converting personal experience into formalized, shareable knowledge, and vice versa. When that shift happened, it allowed companies to collect insights of their employees, fostering the idea of continuous learning and development. In modern industries, the evolution of knowledge management is exemplified exactly like tools like MITRE, where that tool itself, that framework itself, makes everyone slightly better and gives everyone a solid footing to build on in their own specific organization. So the constant exchange is vital to go back and forth, explicit to tacit, explicit to tacit. And that innovation is the way Toyota and all the car companies worked in the 80s, and you can see it in organizations now that have adopted these principles, the things they're releasing, the idea of knowledge sharing and creation. So in this world where cyber threats, like I said, mentioned faster than ever, I think one of the biggest things you can do today is embed these principles in your organization. I think you foster a culture of open collaboration, you encourage mentorship, you build platforms that turn personal experience into shared knowledge. And I think together we can create a future where knowledge flow drives innovation and resilience, making every organization safer, stronger, and smarter. I think mentorship plays a critical role. I think there's a lot of folks who have walked a long road in cyber. What you're doing is you're transferring tacit knowledge, the personal-based experience skills that are difficult to document between senior and junior staff. I have had a weird career where I've done things that not a lot of the average bear just won't do in their career. Like, hey, have you been a CISO or presidential campaign? Because it's like an 8-month job. Let me tell you all about it. So, and it's great to be able to talk to folks about that and those experiences and make folks a little more knowledgeable, and they're going to take that knowledge and combine it with what they know. So in cybersecurity, think of it like learning how to detect subtle threat patterns or how to handle high-pressure incident responses. These programs not only speed up the learning process, but create a culture of continuous improvement and learning. So again, I think adopting these principles into your organization is super critical. One of my favorite things is enhanced threat intelligence. I think Seiki adoption would facilitate the externalization of individual experiences into formalized threat reports, feeds, and intelligence. An example is there is a group of friends, we all kind of did all the intel things, and we were analyzing a phishing email, And one of the guys that we were working with was from the area where the phishing email originated. So we did our Google Translate, and we're like, oh, this is what it says. And no, actually, you would only use this word if you were from this part of the country. How do you know that? Oh, because that's where I'm from. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. So it's those personal experiences, those personal insights that people have, I really think we should take advantage of. The idea that you have so much knowledge to share with other people that's hard to codify. And again, things like DevSecOps, they get continuous integration, but I think it's that individual experiences that we all have contribute to a greater role. One of the other things, I swear it's not a thing, if you're going to do it, if you decide to write a book, me and some friends wrote a book, get an ISBN. We did a thing called Blue Nomicon, and basically it is, I got a bunch of friends, hey, give me 1,000 words on a leadership topic, on a technical topic, or just tell me a story. Like one of the favorite things at conferences are those hallway chats we all like. Hey, this one time at Incident Response Camp, those are great stories that we tell. And I think the idea of telling stories, finding your voice, once you do, share the knowledge that you have. So again, Seiki model, what we're trying to get to is that idea of a golden spiral of continuous knowledge creation and growth. Each time that level of knowledge is going to be slightly more complex. Each time that level of knowledge is going to be slightly more difficult, and we're going to get better from it. I think that's all I've got. I talk super fast, more like boo and a, hey. Somebody any questions? Not everybody at once, it's fine.
Don't be shy. Don't make me ask Mick questions. I know where the bodies are buried. Yeah.
Good presentation, sir. So for the tacit knowledge, right, it has to be a personal experience. Like you said, all the new AIs coming out now, they really can't, come out of the computer. Could you give an example of how the AI could have some tacit knowledge?
AI wouldn't have tacit knowledge.
Right.
Like machines don't have experiences. Machines that get fed data convert that into assumed experience, but it's a mathematical computation, right? The question was like, do AI systems have that tacit knowledge? How could a machine have tacit knowledge? Like you're feeding it data. You're creating explicit knowledge, right? When you ask it a question, that's you inputting it back and forth. The idea that these systems are continually learning, I think AI is slightly different because to me it's always going to be a tool. It's not going to replace something, it's going to be a tool that you use much like any other. And I think the creation of knowledge from AI systems is important derivative work, but again, that goes back into it is important derivative work if you can validate it. And much like all of the spelling errors that you saw in the pictures earlier, we've all asked a generative AI question and we got an answer and we're like, whoa, that is the wrong answer. There's not 3 R's in strawberry. So that idea of knowledge creation I don't think is possible from AI systems at this point. Like 5 years from now, like, oh, Mick was wrong. But like right now, I just don't see it.
Can I kind of back onto that?
Yeah.
Is that what's missing from AI? Is that we don't have enough experiential knowledge data being put into it? We don't have a broad enough base? I mean, where is the missing link with AI right now?
I think it is in the computation of it, right? You're feeding these large language models all this data, but you're just feeding it a bunch of one type of data, right? And once you create that, once you document something, you turning tacit into explicit and vice versa. It's a person doing that, and I don't think a machine has that personal experience to be able to create something.
Thank you.
It's just about the AI. It's because there's the temperature. It's a random. When you say that AI have creativity, in fact, it's a random. So AI is not made to be precise. So that's why you always need to validate it. And it will not change because it's the way it's made behind the scene. So just to help.
So just so that I'm clear, what you're saying is that AI is meant to generate a summary and not a specific? It will never be specific enough? Is that?
I think it could be.
It will be if you add another layer.
Right, right. But again, it goes into the same concept as garbage in, garbage out, right? Mm-hmm. So your large language model is only as good as the data you're feeding into it.
I'm going to get my steps today.
Thank you. First, acknowledge that I did see Gung Ho when it came out. Sorry, boomers. Yep. Question about SETI and maybe applicability to the cybersecurity scarce skills. So scarce skills, lots of new entry people coming in, and yet the jobs require a lot of experience, and there's no career path. So the question is it SETI is a model as kind of a throwback to craftspeople and apprenticing, and do you see a fit there to solve what I would call a SOC fatigue, scarce skills gap?
Yes and no, right? I think the idea of what a person who is nascent in their cyber career knows and what is expected to know, I think there is a wild disconnect, but I think that's a completely different conversation when you start talking about the hiring processes and what the skills required for those are. I think cyber as a whole, we could do a lot better job with mentoring people. We could do a lot better job with encouraging more diverse voices in this industry. And it stinks. Like, I've been doing this for a while, and you know, we're constantly trying to bring in new voices, new faces, so that we don't have those same rigid models. If we keep having the same trains of thought, it goes back to that, this is the way we've always done it. Like, we've all heard that before, right? Like, we've always done it this way. And I'm like, oh, that must make it efficient. So again, yeah, I think those are apples and like slightly different colored apples. Anyone? Oh.
Yeah, thanks for a great talk. I love the stressing of the socialization of knowledge sharing and bringing people up. How do you deal with the problems that we have, especially in a smaller island community, of sharing some of that knowledge, especially if it's like incident reports where you're either thinking of it as a competitive advantage or perhaps just too embarrassing to share? How do you nudge people into doing that for a wider industry group?
So in my experience, and the question was generally like, how is knowledge sharing? In my experience, there have been organizations I've been at who are reluctant to share, right? No one wants to admit their house is dirty. Like, what? We have no incidents. Pfft, no. And I think it depends on who is sharing that data. I think the most collaboration I've ever had in my career, the most success I've had in my career, was collaborating with fellow analysts, like folks who are actually doing operations, who are responding to the incidents, who have the actual IOCs, but don't have as much, they aren't as hamstrung by policies and management. Like, I understand the competitive advantage, but I think one of the benefits of the ISAC is it destroys the competitive advantage. We're not here for that. Right? When you join an ISAC, you're collaborating with people. You're making a conscious decision to collaborate with other folks in your vertical for specific information sharing. And I think more organizations are learning the benefits of that. You're always going to have the, you know, oh, we're not going to share anything. And I think that's a detriment to organizations who still have that model.
Mick, can you talk maybe a little bit about Chatham House rules? I don't know how widespread a concept that is. You know, I think one of the advantages to getting those peers together and saying Chatham House rules, nothing outside of this room leaves this room, you know, other than from a tactical standpoint.
Well, I think
does
the
that
idea,
help or encourage?
I mean, my version of Chatham House is always different, right? Is Chatham House has always been, hey, you can repeat what you heard, you just can't source what you heard. And that has always been pretty simple. I think when you share information with people, you know, everything I've really been a part of most of my career has been trust groups, where you have someone like Carlota and I know each other, we've seen each other, we've talked in person. I trust her, I will share information with her. I think it becomes difficult when you try and do that online. I think that's where a lot of trust groups that are strictly online kind of fail a little bit because that trust is not established. But I do think that, Chatham House has gone the way of TLP.
Fair enough.
Information wants to be free.
Yeah. Well, and I think that maybe in the islands you have an interesting opportunity to create a vision of trust here because you are more interactive. You are a smaller space, and you're not having to put everything online.
Right.
Right.
And I think here, everything is geographically disparate, but not by a lot. So I think you're still able to have that collaboration in person, locally, or even like virtual sessions, but combine those two. I think the potential is there, and that's why I'm excited to see just the growth of it. I was in Jamaica last year for a conference, and that has gotten bigger and bigger each year. So I think that the idea of knowledge sharing and creation is slightly different for each island, but again, it comes to an overall source and overall growth.
Any other questions for Mick today? All right, Mick.
Thanks, everyone, and
Thank you.
happy Halloween.